Imagine an artisan, a wood carver, who spent his days working with his hands. He crafted all sorts of useful things: sturdy tables for eating, simple chairs for resting, practical tools for the fields. His workshop was filled with the smell of sawdust and honest labor. Everything he had made was for a purpose, a function. One day, as he walked through the forest, his foot kicked against a stone. It was just an ordinary stone, unremarkable, no different from 1,000 others on the path. But something about its shape, its smooth, cool surface, caught his eye. He picked it up and brought it back to his workshop, placing it on a dusty shelf. Weeks passed. He continued making tables and chairs, but sometimes he'd glance at that stone. It sat there, doing nothing, serving no function. One evening, after a particularly long day, he looked at the stone again. He thought of all the beautiful, important things in life that weren't, quote, useful in a practical sense: a sunset, a melody, a moment of quiet reflection. He decided to create something for that stone. Yeah. He took a beautiful piece of olive wood, smooth and fragrant. With meticulous care, he began to carve. He didn't rush. He fashioned a small, exquisite box, polished to a soft gleam with intricate patterns on its lid. It was unlike anything he usually made. Not for eating, not for sitting, not for working. It was made purely to hold something. When the box was finished, he carefully picked up the ordinary stone from the dusty shelf. He cleaned it, slowly turning it over in his fingers. Then, with a quiet reverence, he placed it inside the beautiful hand-carved box and closed the lid. He didn't put the box back on the dusty shelf. Instead, he placed it on a small, clean stand in the corner of his workshop, bathed in the morning light. It was still just a stone. Not a Cindy or Larry stone, but a stone nonetheless. But by being chosen, by having a special place made for it, by being set apart in that beautiful box, it was transformed. It became something more than ordinary. It became a point of contemplation, a quiet center in his bustling workshop. It became, in its own way, sacred. With tonight's sermon, I am going to introduce the foundational idea of sacredness as that which is distinct, elevated, and designated for a higher purpose. It's about establishing the spiritual space for the High Holy Days. Throughout the High Holy Days, we will explore the question, what does it mean to be sacred? We will explore 4 distinct definitions, one for each of my sermons. Each sermon will also provide a connection to a prayer or 2, and ways for us to model or act out the various meaning of holiness or sacredness. The Hebrew word for holiness or sacred is kodesh, kuf dalet shin. There are many uses for this Hebrew word: kadosh, kiddush, kodesh, kadesh, etc. All of these Hebrew words are based on the most traditional biblical understanding of kodesh, that which is set apart, holy, distinct, or consecrated. This does not mean or imply better than, just being designated for a unique purpose. Think of kiddush, when we use wine for sacred use, or Shabbat, in other words, setting apart time. In Judaism, when we think of holiness, we turn our attention to God. As we learn in the Torah, God's holiness makes God unique, distinct from all else. think of the words to one of our most beloved and well-known songs, which comes from the Bible, Mi chamocha. Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai. Who is like you among the gods? Adonai. When Abraham met God and was promised he would be the progenitor of generations of people to come, he first had to accept God as the one God, higher than any of the other minor gods that were worshipped by inhabitants of other lands. When the children of Israel were freed from bondage in Egypt, they were promised to be God's chosen people, distinct from all other nations. And what did Am Yisrael have to do to stay in relationship with God? They were given the Torah at Mount Sinai and required to live based on the values, stories, and laws present in our sacred texts. We, as Am Kadosh, a holy people, were called to be distinct, not by isolation, but by our commitment to ethical living, justice, and spiritual awareness in a world that often pulls us toward the mundane. This setting apart wasn't about exclusion, but about focus and intentionality. We are always to remember that there is more to life than just the everyday grind. When we live our lives based in Torah, we are truly living as Am Kadosh. There's a very famous story passed down through generations about the great Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev. You might recognize that name because we read about him in the High Holy Days. He lived in a time when many Jews were uneducated in formal Torah study, yet deeply connected to their faith. One Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year, he was leading services. He looked out at his congregation and saw a simple, unlettered Jew, a water carrier, who was crying uncontrollably. The water carrier was a good man, but he couldn't read a single word of the prayer book. He stood there, watching others pray, feeling utterly lost, yet desperate to connect. Overwhelmed by his inability to participate, he took out a small, worn book from his pocket. It was an old Hebrew alphabet book, one he'd had since childhood. He looked up at the heavens, tears streaming down his face, and began to recite letter by letter, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet. He went through the entire alphabet from Aleph to Tav, repeating it again and again. Some of the more learned members of the congregation were aghast. "Rabbi," they whispered, "he's desecrating the holy day. He doesn't know the prayers." But Rabbi Levi Yitzchak just smiled, a profound, knowing smile. "No," he said, "quite the opposite. You see, my friends, all our prayers, all our wisdom, they are made of these letters. This simple man with his pure heart is offering God the raw materials of all prayer. He has laid before the Holy One the very building blocks, trusting that God, in God's infinite wisdom, will arrange them into the perfect prayer for him. His prayer is the purest of all, for it is offered with absolute sincerity and from the depths of his soul, setting apart nothing but his deepest yearning. The water carrier's simple act, stripped of all complexity, became the most sacred prayer of the day, precisely because it was set apart by his intention and utter devotion. One of my favorite things to do is to teach about liturgy. Thinking about being holy, there are two prayers that I immediately think of. The Baruch Hu, our call to worship, and the Kiddush, our prayer over the wine. Let's begin with Baruch Hu. When I work with kids on our family Shabbat services, I explain this is the prayer which expresses our intention of being ready to begin our prayer service. Hey, you guys! It's time to start praying. This prayer calls us to bless Adonai, the one who is blessed. It's a call to attention, to shift from our secular concerns to a sacred moment, to acknowledge God's unique holiness before we begin prayer. It literally sets apart the prayer service. When we lift our wine glasses to recite Kiddush, we are literally transforming food and drink into a sacred act. The action of lifting our glasses and making Kiddush reminds us that even the most ordinary things can be made holy. We are not just drinking wine or grape juice. We are creating a holy, sacred place and time. So far, we've explored one definition of sacred. Then we looked to our liturgy for two examples of how we are able to create holy space and time. What about when we are outside of our sanctuaries? How are we able to express this idea of uniqueness or holiness in our neighborhoods, our cities, our states, etc.? I've always taught the need to be a dugma ishit, someone who is an example, a good example in his or her actions and thoughts as a result of his or her personality. However, there's a stronger example. Ishiyut shedugma, someone whose entire personality is something we should emulate, who gives a good example in everything that he or she does. When we act in ways that are meant to be emulated, we are serving as role models. Our sacred texts, beginning with the Torah, teaches us how to live as a dugma ishit or ishiyut shedugma. Let's explore this. When we make Kiddush, we make a holy, sacred space. Well, how do we do this outside the temple without needing liturgy? How do we create these sacred spaces in our everyday lives? Let me tell you a story that Bacha has heard 100 times before. One way in which a created space was made holy. This story is from when I was a rabbinic student at the Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati. Several of my classmates and I were sitting in class about 15 minutes before class was about to start. We were discussing our plans for the upcoming Shabbat and weekend. One of my classmates asked me what I was going to be doing to celebrate Shabbat. I responded, I'll probably get up with Carly. She was a baby at the time. Well, she was 2 or 3. Play some games with her and then watch a movie with her. My classmate, I realize now that she said this in jest, but I didn't know this back then, responded that I could not watch a movie on Shabbat. I'd be desecrating the sanctity of Shabbat. I responded again, hey, listen, during the week, I get to see Carly in the morning as I drive her to school, and then maybe for a few minutes before she goes to bed at night. On Shabbat, I get to spend the whole day with her, and whatever we do is holy. For me then, and still today, spending time with the people I love in my life is dedicated, holy time. But these times have to be set apart intentionally. I encourage all of you to intentionally create sacred spaces in your lives, time devoted to family, reflection, quiet. The lesson here is that all of us are capable of designated certain moments as sacred, even amidst chaos. We have a responsibility to live lives with ethical distinction, living out Jewish values with integrity, compassion, and justice in any way that distinguishes us in the world. Not to be superior, but to be an example. When we consider ourselves as better or superior to others, we are not living out lives with ethical distinction. Throughout Jewish history, we have been guided by those who lived this way. Elie Wiesel, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, Albert Einstein, Hannah Senesh, David Ben-Gurion, Maimonides, Rabbi Regina Jonas, Rashi, Moses, Deborah, Ruth, Abraham, just to name a few. Finally, there is one more idea to reflect upon. When we study, pray, or live our lives, we must do so with mindfulness and intentionality. If we sit in services and are simply, quote, going through the motions, we are not really there, are we? What about when you spend time with close friends and family? Are we focused on our phones or wondering about what is going on anywhere else? If you answer yes, you are not living your truest life. Let's be blunt. The world is screaming at us. It is loud, it's chaotic, and it demands our constant scattered attention. It tells us every moment needs to be productive or entertaining. But our tradition right here in the concept of Kodesh shouts back, stop! Not everything is the same. Some things are different. Some things are sacred. Like that ordinary stone, we have the power to elevate the mundane. Not by magic, but by choice. By making a conscious decision to set something apart. A moment, a conversation, a quiet thought, a promise to be truly present. Are you just doing Shabbat, or are you truly making Shabbat sacred time? Are you just mumbling a prayer, or are you actually calling out with kavanah, with intention, to the one who is unique and holy? The high holy days aren't just a calendar event. They are 10 days of radical reprioritization. Your annual spiritual detox. It's your chance to consciously, intentionally set yourself apart from the noise, from the distractions, from the things that diminish your soul. So, this 5786, I challenge you. Find that ordinary stone in your life, that overlooked moment, that taken for granted relationship, that quiet corner of your soul, and build a beautiful, intentional box for it. Set it apart. Make it sacred. Because when we choose to elevate the small moments, we begin to transform our entire lives. Shana Tova Umetuka. May you be inscribed for a good and sweet year. Good Yom.